All right. Yeah? I'm going? Yep. Okay, so we're going. Let me just show you a little bit about GitHub. So here are some files. Here, what do you mean? Oh, they need that for me, capturing me. You can see me still. Here are some files I've been working on. And I sent you all a link of resources via email. And so if you are watching this video online and you didn't get it, here's the link of resources. And so there's some video training resources. And right now I'm working with some files, so I need to give credit, obviously, where credit is due. I'm working with some files from lynda.com, a really great training, CSS selectors with James Williamson. So you could take this at lynda.com if you're watching this video online, as opposed to at our training here in the classroom. I can see a lot of you already have this open. And if you are watching this online, I'm going to go to Google short URL. And there's this thing, Google URL Shortener. And I already have this as one of them. I'm not sure which. I'm just going to create it again. Maybe it gave me the same one. But now that URL right there, so if you didn't receive this URL from me and you're watching the video, this URL will take you to that document, which is a link of web resources. And so there's a lot of really great resources on that page. I just want to make sure that you all have that. And of course, I wanted to give credit for these files that I'm working with from lynda.com, CSS selectors with James Williamson. So check out that training. All right, so I want to show you sort of, first of all, a little bit about WebStorm and then a little bit about GitHub, just so that you could kind of see some of my workflow and see what GitHub does. But I'm working with these different files here, and I'm done with, no, I'm just starting this one. So I'm going to hold down Function Shift in WebStorm and hit F6. And in WebStorm, there's all these keyboard shortcuts. And you could go to Help, and you could go into a default key map reference in WebStorm. So I'm just kind of giving you a tour of WebStorm. No matter what IDE you're working with, you could use it or not use it. But I've played with a bunch of different IDEs. I've worked with Atom. I've worked with Sublime. I've seen Brackets. Haven't worked with it. But out of all of them, I really like JetBrains tools. So JetBrains is a company that makes IDEs. And they have PyStorm, they have PHPStorm, they have WebStorm, which is what I'm using right now. They have IntelliJ. And Google, one of the great endorsements for me about JetBrains is that Google was originally using Eclipse for Android Studio. They built Android Studio on top of Eclipse. But then they said, you know what, JetBrains has a better IDE, IntelliJ for Java. And they switched, and that was a huge switching cost, They switched from Eclipse to JetBrains IntelliJ in order to build Android Studio on top of it. And so that really spoke volumes to me about the kind of product that JetBrains puts out for an integrated development environment. So that's what I'm saying when I say IDE, that refers to an integrated development environment. And JetBrains, which is the company that produces them, makes really outstanding ones, which is one of the things I like about WebStorm. But here are all the keyboard shortcuts. And so you could come in here and you could just do a Command F and say, you know what, I need to know how to do a replace or something. And so then I typed Command F and it brought up this search window, and I typed in REPL and it showed me anything that has to do with replace. So I could just kind of think about what am I trying to do, and then it'll show me the keyboard shortcut. So that's a really useful thing about WebStorm. And something else that's useful and fun, if you're on the Mac, you could just do help. This doesn't do it the same way on Windows, and if I do help and type in, replace, well, that didn't give me something, but what about find? So let me just come back out. Find, and then, it shows me, oh, here, are these the find things you're looking for, right? So it's showing me my different options. And that's a Mac thing, not a Windows thing, but nice. So I'm going to rename these files here because I'm kind of taking them out of the folder structure and just sort of making them sequential. This is what I'm doing right here just because that's the way I'm anal. And I'm going to do Function Shift F6. That's a keyboard shortcut. And basically that's a refactor. So if you ever hear the word refactor, that basically means I want to change something, but when I change it, I want you to look through all of my code and make sure I don't screw something up, right? Meaning like I changed a name, but I had other files that were referring to what I changed. Okay, well, in those other files, change the references to what I changed, right? So that's a refactor. And so I'm doing a rename here. and that's F6. If I wanted to, I could say, hey, where is Refactor? And I don't know where, I'm no longer, there we go, help, find an action. I don't know what I'm doing. All right, so that would be like under code, reform, no, that's not it. Where's Refactor? What happened to my little find window? Refactor. So, I don't know, say, all right, so I'm going to refactor that, F6, and I'm going to make this file 12, and there I've changed that to file 12, and then I'm going to shift F6 and make that file 12, and then I've changed that to file 12, and I'm going to drag those and drop them out of these folders, and there we go, and drag this and drop that out. And what it's asking me is like, hey, do you want to search for references within here as I move these files and update any references? And so I'm done with this folder here. I just want to make sure that there's no images there that I need. Get rid of that folder. And I come down here, and then I could open these, and I'll show you kind of what I'm doing. So one of the things is my code's a little bit junky right now. It's not formatted very well. And so if I go into that keyboard shortcut thing, default key map reference, and look for Command F format, one of the things I see here is if I do Command Option L, it'll reformat my code. Command Option L reformats my code. And all those options are up here also. So code, reformat, it's also right there, and the shortcut's right there too. But I'm going to hold down Command Option L, and it just reformatted all of my code. Right? And you can see that happen here again. All my code, the indentation isn't all that great. Command Option L, and it just reformatted it all for me. So good IDs will do that. And then here I need to kind of change these references. They didn't quite get changed the way I wanted. So I'm going to hold down Option. And this is, whoops, this is really cool. Let me just zoom in. I hold down Option, and I could put cursors in multiple places. And so now I've got my cursor in multiple places, and I'm editing multiple lines at once. So those lines were all similar and needed to be changed. And so that's holding down Option. I'm going to do that again right here and get rid of that one. And so now I'm just referring, because all these files had their own image folder. I'm just saying, they're referencing the same images, so I'm just going to put them all into that image folder and take them out of these folders and make them sequential. So I got all those, and then I'm going to look in here to see, and that's referencing the correct one, 12 styles. Right, is 12 styles right there. That's the one I needed. So that all looks right. So now I can come up here to the right, and then I get this little kind of flyout which says, hey, go ahead and click something. So I click that, and now it brings up this page. And so these pages are all from that training on lynda.com. And here, it's talking about the CSS selector focus and how focus works. So it has a little bit of a description about focus, and tells you a little bit about it. And not only that, you could come over to the code and start playing with it. And so these are really great resources. And as you look at these files, they're going to show you how CSS selectors work. And again, go take the training at lynda.com so you can see the talk through on all of it. But here's the element selector, more on the element selector, on the class selector, ID selectors, right? So these are all the things you've learned about already on, doing Code Academy and Shay How. So if you look at like, okay, well, how's an element selector work? And then I preview this file, right? Here's an H1. We're selecting heading 1, everything heading 1. We're making the color red. Or if I come up and I bring in like how do class selectors work, come in here, and here's the warning, a class dot, right, warning, and make that color red. Or any H1 that has the class warning applied to it. So this describes it all, shows you syntax examples, all those files are there, right? And maybe I want to share this so that you guys could download it and work with it yourselves on your computers. Well, that's where GitHub comes in. So my workflow is like if I want to create a new repository, I'll go to GitHub, and then I create my repositories in here under my account. So I go to repository, and right, I've already created one, CSS selectors, Lynda, code I worked through while going through CSS selectors at lynda.com, right? And to do that, I would create a new repository by clicking new right here. So I go into my repositories and I just click new, and when I click new, it asks me, hey, what do you want the name of your repository to be? Anything you want. Give it a description, fine. Public, anybody can see this code, cool. And then a git ignore is going to help, GitHub ignore certain code. Is it GitHub or, yeah, it's GitHub, not your IDE that, I don't know. No. So git ignore will help, like, so that file is like, in WebStorm generates this annoying file, and let me show it to you. And so I'm in my command line here, the terminal, and let me just clear that. And pwd to print my working directory. Let me zoom in a little bit for y'all. And I'm currently in CSS selectors Linda, right? So that's the file I created. And I'm going to do an ls la, and that will show me everything that's in there. And so I have this git ignore file. I'm just looking for my WebStorm file. Yeah, so GitHub doesn't track the changes on those things. Okay, so right here I have this IDEA file. And IDEA is a file that's generated by WebStorm. And it tracks changes as I make changes to code in WebStorm. And it's just for WebStorm, right? I don't really need to track changes on that. So GitHub is going to allow you to track as things change, you track those changes. So, but I don't care if anything changes in here. So inside of git ignore, if I do a cat git ignore, cat.git ignore, I can see this is what's inside my git ignore file. And it's saying, you know what, this is a comment, and I'm going to ignore any IML file, any file. So this stars everything. I'm going to ignore any file with the IML extension. And I'm going to ignore anything in a folder called .idea, right? And plus I'm going to ignore this file, and plus I'm going to ignore more stuff. And so this is saying, you know what, ignore anything that's going on basically with this .ide, because I don't need to track those files right there. So that's how git ignore works. So back to where we were, which was creating a GitHub account, you know, then you're creating your repository, then you just click repository. Well, once your repository is created, you go into it, and you can choose clone in desktop right here. And then you clone that repository to your desktop. And then you choose a location. You choose a location where you want that folder to be. So I've already cloned my repo to the desktop, and if I look at it in Finder, I kind of have a weird folder structure, so don't pay too much attention to that. But here inside, I created a folder right here, right? And that's where I put all those files. And so on the command line, when I go to that folder, I'm in that folder, CSS selectors Linda, and then I there's a couple of commands that we could do. So I'm just going to kind of show you how GitHub works, because right now on GitHub, inside this is all that we have, right? Those are all the files that are there. But now I could do a git status. And the git status says, you know what, here are all these files that have changed. And these files all right there are the same files right here, right? And the IDE file is not in that list because I've ignored it. I've ignored the IDE file. So now that I've done a git status, and Ryan, if you could write these commands maybe right over there on the left under the boot camp stuff. I just want to give the basic ones. So git status is the first command you should know. I'm going to give you the basic GitHub commands, git status. And then git add dash dash. Is that it?
I do git add period.
Yeah, git add dash dash all. Git add dash dash all will add all of the all these files to something called the staging area. Having to find the words there. So now if I do a git status again, they've all gone green. So I did a git status, then git add dash dash all. You were going to say something?
Yeah, and we'll come back to Git to tomorrow, or Git as well tomorrow. But one thing is where he uses these terms like staging, production, development. Kind of think of it as like an assembly line. And when he says staging, like once it's in, like development, like he's coding on it, and then when it's staging, it means like if he was building like, a widget, he had built the widget and now he's waiting for it to be like packaged and shipped off. So it's like staging, just waiting for you to send it to GitHub or wherever.
Yeah. Not yet. So the reason that there's like an intermediate area between your computer and GitHub, this is the staging area, there's an intermediate area between your computer and GitHub, is I had all those changed files. What if I didn't want to commit them all at once, meaning move them all up to GitHub at once? So let's say that I had some files that were related to cats and some files that were related to dogs, right? Just, it's an analogy, right? If I took all my cat files and all my dog files and moved them to the staging index, the staging area, which you do with git add all, move it to the staging area, and then from the staging area, that's where I say, okay, take everything in the staging area and move it to GitHub, and you do that with a git commit, and if I move all my cat files and dog files to the staging area and then I commit them all to GitHub, okay, well now my cat and dog files got put to GitHub with one commit. So if I ever wanted to later like take out the dog files, I have to roll both the cat and dog files, all those changes back. But if I just take the cat files and say add, git add, and I could just name the specific files, add the cat files, and now commit the cat files, right? So they went to the staging area first, and then everything in the staging area got committed, just the cat files. And then I say, okay, now add all the dog files to the staging area, and now commit from the staging area all the dog files to GitHub online. Right? Now I have two commits. I have the cat files and I have the dog files. So if later I want to get rid of the cat files, I just roll back the cat file commit, right? And so it allows me to group like files before I commit them to GitHub, and then you make commits. Anyhow, that's the staging area. Good thing to know. So the next one would be a git commit -m, which means I'm going to make a commit and then give it a message, and the message would be like adds first files. Adds first files.
So, with all the useful things that are being put up on Recorder, could you put up the web address for that
Useful URL?
Useful URL, the Url Shortener one?
Sure, I'll show you how to do that. Yeah, yeah.
He's saying just
What's the address for it? I didn't get it down.
Okay, I'll get to that in 1 second. All right, so I've committed them all, and now the last thing, so git commit -m is the next one, and git push is the next. And it's probably going to tell me, okay, great. No, sometimes it says you need to do it with this code, then you just do it with that code, and it works. But now I just pushed everything up to GitHub. So now if I come back here, and this is like the magic, right? Like all those files are now there. And I could come over here, and people can either download this as a zip, or they could clone it in their desktop. Meaning you can now just bring this straight down to your computer, and you could start working with these files and looking at them, right? And not only that, I can now go in, and with other GitHub commands, there's a lot of depth and complexity. Start rolling things back, or create changes, which I may or may not want to integrate. And so there's a lot of depth and complexity, but this is all we want to give you through this week are the basics. So that was like, if you're new to GitHub, probably a little bit overwhelming, right? But you just roll with it over 10 weeks. These basics are what you need to take away over 10 weeks. Is step 1, create a GitHub account. Step 2, download the GitHub client to your machine, which allows you to then, 3, go into GitHub and create a repo. So you just go to your account, and you go into repos, and then you say, okay, new repo. And then once you've created that repo, you say, okay, I've created it. Now I want to clone it in my desktop. So you created it out there on the web at GitHub. Now I'm going to create a clone of that on my desktop. And then once you have a clone of that on your desktop, you can start, doing things where you do git status, git add all, git commit, and git push. And so that's an absolute takeaway at the end of these 10 weeks, that you know how to do those things. And then you said, hey, can you provide that link to those useful resources? And so I'll go get that link, and Google short URL, there we go. And I think it was this one. There it is. So, yeah, but copy that link address, and I'm going to go into WebStorm, and I'll create a new file. And it's just going to be a new text file, so I'll do a new file. And useful resources.txt, just checking that there. And I'll put a 00 at the beginning of that, just so it goes at the very top of my list. And now I have useful resources.txt there. And so I open that, and I can paste in that URL. Here are some useful resources for learning web programming. And I save that file, and then I come back to my terminal, and I do a git status. Give me my status from what's going on with GitHub. And it's like, you know what, you got a new file. And that new file is this text file. Okay, well, let me add that file, git add all. And if I wanted to, I could say, hey, just git add 00 useful resources.txt, and it's just going to add that one file. But git add -- all is good enough for you all at this point, right? Or you could specify the files, and you just keep adding them on there. And now if I do a git status, okay, well, that file's been added. And yeah, it's just on my local computer. So now it's in that staging area. Do I want to commit it? Yeah, git commit -m adds useful resources file. So now I've added that, and now if I do a git status, it tells me, hey, you know what? I am my computer, your branch is ahead of origin master, which is GitHub, right? The remote. It's ahead by one commit. So now I'm going to do a git push. And so that's going to push that up to GitHub. And now if I do a git status, it does, you know, your branch is up to date with origin master. And so if I come over to GitHub now and look and do a refresh, I have useful resources in there. If you click on that, here's the link, right? And I could open that up, and it takes me there. And so that's sort of the basics of GitHub. And the last thing I'll show you is I have this git log, so you don't need to know about this command. You can learn all about the different commands by looking online. lynda.com also has a great training on GitHub. But you can see here are my different commits. Here's the last one I did, adds useful resources file. Adds first files was the one right before that. So if at any point I wanted to undo something I did, I've got all that code stored up there, and I also have it stored in increments and steps. And I could then go, oh, you know what, let's go back 2 steps to the way it was. And so that's how GitHub works. Now, you had a question. Yeah? No longer a question? Anybody else have any questions? How many people that owe a question? Let's hear it.
You had said that the help is for Mac. I'm wondering if you could also use it on a PC.
Help is for Mac. Yeah, well, I did that little find thing. I haven't seen that on a PC in that way. That's something I like about the Mac. And I'm also, one thing I will say is that I'm using Unix-based commands. And Unix-based commands are, for me, what I've seen pretty much de facto more the industry standard for when you start doing programming stuff. Unless you go into Windows programming, right? So for sure, then there's DOS-based commands. But I prefer to work in Unix, and that's all Mac side. And if you are on a Windows PC, you could go into settings. So you start your GitHub client on your machine, and somewhere up in yours, you'll have preferences or settings. And it's totally different on the Mac. But you could go in there and you could say, you know what, I want to use a different terminal. I want to use the shell. You could choose your editor. And if you choose shell, you could use Unix commands on the Mac for doing your GitHub stuff. But you have to do it through that GitHub client and choose your editor. Yeah, Adrian.
If you're looking at your log, and how do you get out of your log when you git log it?
So if it just keeps going and going, some of the commands to get out would be like Control-C or Q or Escape, or just keep hitting spacebar until you get to the end. Because if you have a lot of commits, you'll just keep going through your log forever. Which one was it? Control-C, Q,
It just says end of the log.
Escape? Spacebar keeps bringing up more.
Yeah, it's just,
You're on Windows. Are you using the shell?
yeah.
Try typing in quit. Try
I'll
typing
come look at it in a second. Any other questions?
Oh, just Q.
Q, yeah. All right. Let me see a show of hands. How many people that was informative and helpful?
And we're going to be using that all week, by the way. We'll probably use the visual interface today, the GUI, but then we'll get into that. Like, you'll have a lot of practice, so if it doesn't make sense right now, it will by the end of the week.
How many people that wasn't helpful? Raise your hands. Let me see. Why? Tell me why that wasn't helpful.
Special case, I've done it before.
Okay, great. And you? Too much information at once. And why was it not helpful over here, Frank? A little quick, yeah. Yeah, no, this was just strictly preview of, you'll have this at the end of 10 weeks. Yeah. Yeah, it is quick. It takes a little bit of time to wrap your head around GitHub for whatever reason, particularly if you seem to be over 40 like me. Yeah, that's why we put these commands up here. Git status, git add -- all, git commit -m, and then a message and git push.
So unless we repeat the questions, it's hard.
Oh, unless I repeat the questions. Dang it, that's hard.
I'm willing to drop unless you want to keep going.
Okay. All right. Any more?
Hey, while you're
Any more
here-
thoughts?
While you're here, how many people are you going to use WebStorm this week? Okay. Yeah, while you're here, will you show them how to get it
Sure.
for WebStorm?
All right. So you want to stop this video and we'll do another one? Let's stop it and just start a new one for Emmett.